Good afternoon, everyone. The webinar is about to begin. Please note that today's broadcast is being recorded. The Society of Industrial and Office Realtors is pleased to present this webinar, Optimize Your Site Selection, hosted and sponsored by Ware Malcomb. Today's discussion will last up to 60 minutes and will include time for questions and answers. You may submit a question at any time via the box on your dashboard marked questions. If your question is not answered by the panelists, they will follow up with you after the broadcast. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please message me privately through the chat function on your dashboard, and I'll be happy to assist you. The recording of this broadcast can be found on the e-learning page of the SIOR website. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Tom Jansen. Tom, let's get started.
Thanks, Jana. Good morning, good afternoon. Happy election day to all of you. Hopefully you got out there and voted. I don't know about you guys, but I am excited to not get any more text messages from these candidates. I might feel a little lonely, but I'm happy to see those gone. As Jana mentioned, I am Tom Jansen. I am the Principal of Civil Engineering and Land Development with Ware Malcomb. I have over 25 years of experience in civil engineering, private land development projects, and oversee Ware Malcomb's national civil and surveying group with Chris Strawn. As you saw, we do have some polls running here. Please participate if you can. Want to get a little bit of understanding of who we have in our audience today. We want to welcome you guys. Today we're looking forward to discussing optimizing your site selection and doing proper due diligence. We often hear all the good sites are gone, right? And so many sites now have challenges, whether that's from the shape, the topography, the location, soils, environmental challenges, so many things that go into optimizing our site selection. Just where interest rates are, increased scrutiny from lenders, supply chain issues and whatnot. And so with that, excited to welcome on our experienced panel here to help give us some insights here. So starting with Chris Strawn. Chris leads Ware Malcomb's National Land Development Civil Engineering Group with over 100 land development engineers working in 20 of Ware Malcomb's offices across the country in Mexico and Canada. Ware Malcomb Civil continues to increase its foothold in land development, civil engineering design, and clients in the development community in general. Welcome, Chris. Will Salters. Will is the principal with Terracon, a national consulting engineering firm, leads Terracon's economic development practice. Will's team focuses on high CapEx projects, and he closely works with economic developers, the site selector community, as well as brokers, architects, contractors, and A&E firms. Welcome, Will. Anthony Burnett leads Collier's national site selection practice. Anthony's team focuses on high CapEx and utility-driven projects, including manufacturing and FDI. Welcome, Anthony. And lastly, Brian. Brian Gallagher is Vice President of Corporate Development with Graycor, a national general contractor founded in 1921. Graycor's team focuses on commercial, retail, industrial, logistics, manufacturing, and energy projects throughout North America. Welcome, Brian. So take a quick second here just to look at our poll results. Actually fairly balanced right now on our regions. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here and share the results. So you'll see we've got a pretty wide range, except for those in the Northwest. And then
they're out voting, Tom. They're doing their civic duty.
Right. And then Jana, I'm trying to see. I'm not seeing the other poll here. Regardless, let's go ahead and oh, there we go. So our second poll has just been listed there. Just trying to get an understanding of who's in our audience here today. If we've got brokers, developers, consultants, welcome all. So while that's loading here still, let's go ahead and get started. Got some questions here for our panel. I assume most of our audience here is pretty experienced and already fairly risk adverse when it comes to development. However, what aspect of a site contains the most risk to investigate should be front of mind. And so I want to start with Anthony.
Thanks, Tom. I love batting leadoff. My son prefers to be a number 2 hitter. He thinks it's too much pressure, to try to figure out the opposing pitcher. He loves to see 4 or 5 pitches before he hits. So site readiness right now for large utility-driven projects is probably one of the more challenging things and risks that we're seeing. Onshoring in the wake of the pandemic has brought a tremendous amount of new client opportunities and products to the U.S. Right now, our site selection team, where we just happen to be headquartered in Atlanta, we've got a disproportional share right this year of clients that are either coming from Asia on the west side of the U.S. or on the West Coast, or Europe from the east side, and the mix of projects is really changing. So we're seeing fewer and fewer sort of logistics-driven projects that are driven more by transportation, and more of them are driven by infrastructure. So for a good example, they tend to be large electricity users, and now trying to find sites that already have capability of something like 25 megawatts of power, which for a large manufacturer really isn't an excessive amount of power. It kind of is the amount of power that often kind of gets them going. Those are becoming more difficult. And then water and wastewater is becoming more scarce. I mean, the Colorado River Basin has been well publicized in the media and how restrictive it is going to be to have water throughout that basin. California is sort of an exception to that rule. Water scarcity and reliability for manufacturers is a huge challenge. We are in a current site search for a West Coast manufacturer right now, and had to really abandon looking in a lot of states in sort of the Western US before you get to California because of water scarcity. And what's happening is we're seeing water sort of come in defined amounts, and developers and communities are sort of rationing it, for lack of a better term. So we're seeing excessive tap fees in some markets. We saw a handful that were in the $20 to $25 million range for water tap fees for really 500,000 gallons a day or so of water. And that really is creating a huge challenge for products right now. And it's a risk that we're having to mitigate all across the country.
Thanks, Anthony. Obviously, a lot of research needs to be done on utilities there to get comfortable with your site. Will, with your expertise being more on the soils and environment, why don't you talk to us about what you see?
Well, I don't know about batting leadoff, Anthony. I am used to being first, but it is a privilege to follow you. Evaluating risk or the unforeseen is really the essence of what we do. And at Terracon, our purpose is to explore beyond the surface, and that's obviously a play on words. But from our standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, what are the soil conditions and how does that affect construction risk, environmental risk? What are the CapEx or developability considerations, and then how that may impact the ability to underwrite a deal. And so, from a risk perspective, doing a thorough study or investigation of the site, of the subsurface condition.
Thanks, Will. Chris, I guess with Ware, Malcomb, and civil engineering, how does that layer in with this?
I think an aspect of risk that's reaching almost all sites that we're working on is just the ever-changing codes and the drawn-out entitlement processes that many jurisdictions across the country are putting these sites and projects through. Current number of applications that some of these jurisdictions are getting, some of their lack of staff, their lack of availability to get these projects through their system it's really slowing down the timelines and providing an unclear path to approval and success for the projects. And that's just not something that with the speed to market that we're trying to get to really is very helpful for these projects. You know, the resolution to this really is you know, better details on the plans, persistent, knowledgeable design teams, and just being as proactive as possible moving forward. Also, building on what Anthony discussed, the aspects of site risk is the infrastructure requirements, you know, extensions that are required. Most sites that are available are on areas on the outskirts of jurisdictions, cities and towns. Often the water and sewer infrastructure that's in place isn't sized for expansion of these large facilities, and often these facilities are at capacity. The costs associated to increase the infrastructure, expand the infrastructure, falls on the owners and the developers of these sites, and obviously those are direct hit to the bottom line and a huge risk associated with moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You know, with these costs that are you know, come with this infrastructure, Brian, I bet you have some ideas on the risks involved from a general contractor level.
Sure. Each site and project has unique risk, and as the projects are becoming larger, we're finding there's fewer suitable sites available. And really, we look at the key risks, including soils, the infrastructure, the utilities include water, power, and even waste stream management. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to engage with local power and other utility providers to help understand availability, understand what the costs are going to be to bring the utilities and infrastructure to the site. And that's where an experienced construction partner can really help the team understand the unique site requirements and conditions as it relates to the constructability of the project. So identifying those key risks early, assessing the impacts to the overall project and schedule is critical. And really the key way to reduce those risks is doing the investigation and due diligence early to address the options at the very earliest phases of a project.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've all done a great job of always doing this perfectly, and our due diligence has always been spot on. There's got to be examples out there where it hasn't gone right, where, you know, you guys have seen the buyer remorse, I guess you could have. Chris, do you have any stories you want to share?
You know, I'd say in general, kind of a macro view of the site selection issues or stories that I would have really are tied to use and supply. Specifically use zoning, if it's not used by right and you know the jurisdiction has control on whether you can or cannot develop the project you're trying to put in place is just not something that anyone wants to go through. You know, and then the impacts of, as we've already said, the impacts of utility extensions or the jurisdiction's ability to serve the site. So as a, you know, kind of a macro view of it, Tom, I'd say that those are the specific areas where we see the most issue with site selection.
Absolutely. Anthony, you want to expand on that with some of your history?
Well, this is not a very fun story, but it is a true story. So I did not just stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. There's nothing wrong with that chain, though. I just want to say that there's nothing wrong with that. Well, we have a not so fun story about change orders, and the tough thing about in the sort of the brokerage business or the site selection business is you have different sort of pressures on a project. Some of those pressures are coming from the market, so they're pushing clients to make very fast decisions about site location because they're thinking about ordering equipment, they're thinking about putting raw materials through a process, getting those raw materials turned into something, and then getting those to those customers. So what can often be overlooked or sort of these details that I think Brian's going to talk about even more throughout today on the constructability side. And the story I'm telling is a $25 million bogey. So unsuitable soil conditions, won't support large equipment, the site was really selected based on its proximity to transportation, proximity to power, which is right across the street, almost an abundant resource. But the site sort of due diligence and the geotechnical, it was just something that wasn't fully investigated. And then when it came time to really support the structure, $25 million had to be paid. And you know, Tom, you're shaking your head, and we all are. There are very few projects out there, unless they're in the $2, $3, $4 billion range as far as the total capex, that can absorb a $25 million rounding error. I mean, for most of the projects, for most of our clients, if they're in a couple $100 million, that's such a big investment and something companies don't make regularly, that it really can be a problem. And it's really an example of how not to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brian, you've got to have plenty of experiences being on the general contractor side, that you've seen costs just go out of control.
Sure, I'll just share a couple examples. One involved a developer from the Northeast coming into the Southeast, an area in which they were unfamiliar. Had a very, very aggressive time schedule. Didn't invest their proper time in doing the right due diligence, and made some decisions and committed to the land. And upon further investigation, realized they had some challenges with the soil conditions, had significant impact to the budget and the schedule for the project. They were able to move forward. Another example would be someone who made a choice to move into an existing building, and again failed to do the proper due diligence. Realized that they had insufficient infrastructure, some outdated building systems, and the current permitting requirements dictated that they invest a significant more amount of capital from what they originally planned. So I think the key theme there is really the importance of understanding that the due diligence process, while it might be time consuming and it may be expensive, it's critical to mitigate those risks to ensure that you're not committing to a site or to a facility that has issues that's going to impact or jeopardize the viability of the project.
Yeah, and I think that's really, why we want to pull this panel together here, is really to help our clients, help people, go through this process of due diligence, making sure that they have confidence in moving forward. And I think that's what I want to go into next here is what can we give our clients? How can we give them confidence to move forward? Chris?
Yeah, Tom, it seems pretty obvious as we're all talking about it and talking about issues that we've seen and problems that we've encountered, that it would make sense to get a team of experts like this panel here together to move forward on your project, but it still doesn't happen. And, I would say that that's the most important component to give our clients confidence, is to get a team together that understands what the requirements of the deal are. Often projects will move forward with a napkin sketch of a site plan on what is assumed to be the property, but there's so much more that needs to be looked into: the economics, the location, the zoning, access, utilities, soil, all this stuff has to be vetted early. And to have a team like this is what this panel was put together for, is really what would provide the confidence for our clients moving forward on deciding on site.
Absolutely. Brian, I'd love to see you build on that.
Sure, Tom. I think when clients are looking at projects, ultimately what they want is predictability and certainty in their project outcome. And that's why assembling a team and a strategy early in the process is important. And doing that as early in the site selection process ultimately saves time, money, and reduces the risk to the project. And it's really the only way to really accurately develop the project specifications, so that you're really beginning with the end in mind and what you want that outcome to be. And by adding a general contractor to that team early, the GCs can really help address construction costs, site issues, helping with evaluation, looking at the constructability of the project, doing some option analysis. And GCs are pretty well positioned to understand regional differences in labor costs, material costs, understanding the subcontractor network, and all this information become become pieces that you put into the early planning from the model and budget process. So working with the contractors that do have some of the experience in history and relationships is critical at the very early stages of a project.
So I heard some key things there, Brian, as far as, modeling, analysis, help identifying these things. We've gone through recent terms of fintech, which is becoming a popular word. Now we're hearing the terms prop tech, software programs out there that help us with the economics of real estate analysis. I've got to imagine you guys are using new technology all the time to help these decisions be made. And so I'd love to hear more from you guys on that. Why don't we start with Will?
Yeah, thanks, Hub. Yeah, data analytics is without a doubt adding substantial value to site selection decision making. And I think a theme we'll hear throughout the rest of the panel is that speed to market. And so how do you do that without not addressing, some of the risks that we've already laid out? And, here at Terracon, we've developed a online portal, a tool to address some of those construction and environmental risk considerations. And it's essentially an online portal that puts the decision making into our clients or customer partners' hands to evaluate individual sites or compare sites. And essentially, it's called Stage 1. Combines basically 50, 60 years of our historic project data, combined with about 700 other nationwide public and private data sets. We laugh and say, give us 5 days and we'll give you 50 years worth of information.
Right.
But what it allows you to do is again, and confidentially, remotely, to get a better understanding of the conditions, constructability concerns, potential underwriting ability concerns with the site. And then more importantly, provide a report that lays out what those potential issues could be, and then what the next steps are.
Yeah, it seems like a great program that would really eliminate some properties really fast, focus more on some of the more real properties. Let me kick this over to Anthony. How are you guys using technology?
Sort of two things we use all day, every day. One is Collier's Insight model, INDSITE. So it's industrial site. I mean, again, not too overly creative, a lot of Holiday Inn Expresses in our past. So Insight is essentially a large GIS system with off-the-shelf data and then proprietary databases. So it covers 5 key categories at a broad view for every county in the country. So we look at workforce components, that labor force, those kind of things that would help identify a strong workforce. It can be highly customized too, down to the job, SOC, and NAICS code. We have a large labor union database, whether you want to be close to your union or avoid them. Opinions vary. Probably the thing that differentiates Insight the most is on the cost side. We have a database of every property tax rate in the country for every county in the country, electrical rates, natural gas rates, wages. So we can very quickly identify where the high cost areas are and the low cost areas in a search region, and then layer in things like infrastructure and operational risk, whether there's seismic activity or tornado. So really what we're finding using data like this, it's not necessarily elevating the best places in the US. It's avoiding the places you should never look for your project based on the profile of your project. So if you're heavily utility driven, heavily cost driven, you probably don't want to move to an area, no offense to heavily populated areas because I live in Atlanta, but those tend to be more expensive place to operate your business. So it elevates other parts of the country that maybe you haven't thought of before. On the day-to-day basis, for individual buildings, we have a variant of Insight called Site Advisor. So Site Advisor looks at just a handful of critical component so that our brokerage network at Colliers can quickly help advise and make decisions. So those kind of things are creating speed, lowering risk, and lowering long-term costs for our clients.
Yeah, it seems like very useful to get that speed to market we're talking about, to get that information in your hands. The knowledge is super powerful as
Well, I
know.
mean, and Tom, in a typical brokerage model, it's cast a wide net and then try to find, the right real estate solution. What we're trying to do is really listen to our clients more and more. More of them or more have cost pressures on their business. So can we find the right real estate solution in a market that's going to fit them for the next 20, 30 years?
So once that wide net is cast, things are narrowed down, probably a few properties now that this client, this developer may be looking at. Chris, how can an engineer get involved with technology to help inform decisions on that property?
Yeah, so our civil engineering design teams really try to stay on top of the technological curve, try to be as innovative as possible. But let's be real, civil engineering, we're moving dirt and we're putting pipe in the ground. There's not a ton of technology that goes into that beyond just doing it right. The faster that we can provide information for our clients and their sites, the better. The more information that we can get to them early and quick is really important. Every site's different. Every site has its characteristics that really drive the needle. And so for us, we utilize all of these, many of the things that have already been discussed here. We pull GIS data into CAD. We download topography from available sources, LiDAR that's relatively accurate and easy and free to access. While we're waiting for a survey, we can already start a conceptual grading plan and have an understanding of retaining walls and site costs and earth moving costs. And these things can happen quickly because we're able to download all of this information digitally so fast. So our understanding of optimizing the site as quickly as we can through our expertise and experiences and the information that we can quickly get really helps move the project fast.
Absolutely. Informs a lot of decisions. Brian, how are you guys using PropTech to help your clients?
Well, I think we can all agree the construction industry is generally well known for resisting change, which today I think makes it ripe for innovation and disruption. And we're seeing a lot of investment in construction technology and property technology tools. And a lot of that investment is coming from the industry. And then a lot of it's coming from outside the industry, from Silicon Valley and others that are trying to bring more efficiencies through the use of technology through the construction process. So we're seeing a lot more tools that we're able to work with building information models, look at the BIM models, and combine them with some other tools where we can do some conceptual estimating, do some site modeling, where we can address factors that are really far beyond the standard schedule and budget that you would look at when evaluating a project. And these models really help us compare site layouts, usage scenarios, cut and fill analysis, looking at construction option analysis, looking at the logistics side of a project, and also address areas for future expansion. And ultimately, where tools like this really come into play is when working with a broker, developer, and an owner or site selection firm, you may be comparing different sites, and the cost to build that facility will vary significantly based on the site. And these technology tools allow us to really develop very accurate costs that can be built into the models, so there can be a fair comparison to help improve that decision-making process, and also help with the negotiations for acquiring the site and also negotiating any incentives or entitlements.
Very good, Brian. Thank you. I want to switch up a little bit here. The industrial market, manufacturing has been a hot market for a while. Seems to be a very stable market going forward for the time being. How is the industrial market and that product type affecting the site selection process? And now I'm going to start with you, Anthony.
Sure. So one of the things that alluded to earlier is foreign direct investment for manufacturing. We kind of thought this was coming before the pandemic had started the previous, presidential administration had made a big push on trying to level the playing field with China, and just picking on them because they're one of our largest competitors, and trying to make it a little bit more even playing ground. And there's always been a desire in the U.S. to bring more manufacturing back here. And so there were a lot of leading indicators for that. Energy in the U.S. has been very low for a very long time. We're in a spike right now, probably more because of global stuff going on in Ukraine and Russia. But so we're seeing what we thought was going to happen several years ago, and what the Trump administration has started, is actually happening now. Lots of manufacturing FDI in the U.S. And it's not all just energy electrification projects, although the DOE's grant programs are putting a lot of money into the economy around this. So we're probably all focused on a lot of those projects. But what this is creating, though, are a lot of client opportunities who have never put a facility on U.S. soil. We had a meeting last week with a Polish company, very successful. They have facilities all over Europe, but they have some facilities that are in troubling spots now based on just the global geopolitical environment, and they really think they need to be in the U.S. So never done things here. How we do things here is very different. It's much larger than what a lot of places you see in Europe. We were hosting a company from France a couple of weeks ago, and they're in the baking business. And they said, the guy who was representing the business, he said, this place is amazing. There are 200,000 people everywhere we're looking within 20 minutes. He said that you can't find, he said one of our villages, one of our factories has 15,000. So he was worried about labor. So there's a lot of hand holding with FDI investments. And we're going to Houston tomorrow to help a client from Asia. And, they've never done it here too. So one of the things they really want to know is, what is that checklist? How is it to work here? So that creates tremendous opportunity. And I think it's really the right message we want to send to the rest of the world, that manufacturing can really thrive here in the US.
Absolutely. And with this industrial development here, we're probably seeing some pretty large developments, large projects, a lot of money going into it. Will, how are you seeing industrial?
Yeah, I mean, just to tack on Anthony, I mean, it's just a sheer magnitude of both the volume and the size of project that people call mega projects. We're not talking 7 figures, we're talking 10 figures. And all of these opportunities demand 500,000 plus acres. And I think, generally speaking, it's safe to say that there's a lack of available product. And again, the reoccurring theme of speed to market and being competitive. Some of these foreign direct investment opportunities, these foreign companies come with highly sophisticated in-house design teams. Certainly some of the Asian companies, and they want all these due diligence answers. They want those answers up front. And so, kind of beating my Terracon horse, but the having comprehensive studies done on these sites up front is becoming more and more critical.
Yeah, I think as far as the foreign influence here, Brian, you could probably speak to some of your experiences there.
Well, certainly the foreign direct investment is certainly a key driver for many of the manufacturing projects that we're seeing. But specifically, we're seeing an increase in advanced manufacturing projects, and this includes electric vehicles, life sciences, and semiconductors. And what's interesting about these investments, as Will alluded to, these are 10-figure investments and needing hundreds of acres or 1,000 plus acres. A lot of these companies are also bringing their supply chain partners with them, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. And for the segments I mentioned, the EVs, life sciences, and semiconductors, many of these projects are chemical related, meaning that there's some type of process or some type of production. And these projects are very different from your traditional industrial and logistics buildings or just boxes. Each one is very unique in terms of its the building requirements and the site requirements. So again, the importance of really defining that project early in the process, assembling that team, and developing that strategy becomes even more important.
Absolutely. So I've been hearing a lot of things here, some trends, maybe not even trends, but some consistent responses from you guys. Utility super important, speed to market very, very important at this point. I guess where are we seeing things going? Where are we trending with site selection? And I'm going to go ahead and let me start with Will again here.
Thanks. I mean, we've kind of talked about it. There's a overall flight to innovation. All of the panelists discuss, the development of some form of in-house GIS-based tool or proprietary data to help prospects, help our project partners evaluate sites. Data analytics, it's truly adding substantial value into the site selection decision making and ultimately into design considerations. And I would say if there was kind of one takeaway from my point, it's site data design. We're starting to see sites identified, but then time spent on data analytics before it actually moves into design.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I'd like you to expand on that.
Sure. Certainly the trends we talked about the significance of the FDI driving investment. We're also seeing more private equity and venture-backed projects where private equity firms and venture firms are helping fund some of these projects, and they're looking at the projects through a little bit of a different lens. And certainly a lot of the recent announcements related to some of the DOE funding for some of the EV projects, as well as the CHIPS Act funding some of the semiconductor projects. There's different requirements for each of those projects. In some cases, it specifies the labor stance and things that the owners or brokers need to look at. We're also seeing investors investing in different asset classes or looking at building in locations in which they're not familiar. Speed to market, we've talked about on this panel already. That's certainly a critical driver for many projects. And certainly the owner requirements to meet a certain production date or a commitment, that's definitely putting pressure on the timing of the site selection process and the due diligence process. Certainly another factor driving the site selection process is actually the construction cost. And we're certainly have seen a lot of construction cost inflation, lack of some material availability, which is impacting the overall cost of our project. So we are seeing some owners looking at ways that they can save money. It might include de-scoping a project or doing projects in phases.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, why don't we wrap up with you? What kind of major trends are you anticipating here?
Man, Brian hit the nail on the head. Cost is king right now, and so for so many of our clients, and so the rising cost of construction materials, the rising cost of energy right now. Natural gas is up, electricity rates are up because so many power plants in the U.S. are thriving on natural gas, and then the rising rates on interest rates. And I don't think there's anybody on this panel right now that thinks rates have stopped rising. If you have any of your friends, or if you're in the housing market right now, it's probably the easiest example of how, maybe earlier this year you were trying to upgrade and get a new mortgage and you were okay, maybe paying in the 4s or 5s. Try to get a mortgage right now and you're 7.5 or 8. I can remember my father in the early 80s telling me he had a 12% interest rate, and he was so excited to get that rate because it was right on the heels of the Carter administration, and rates had gone through the roof, and nobody had, there was no liquidity in the market. Everything sounds kind of familiar. So what we're finding right now is the P&L for projects is under a lot of pressure. So we're seeing projects potentially getting delayed. And if they're not getting delayed, then they're demanding that incentives be part of their equation. So incentives can work in 2 different ways. One, they can lower upfront costs. So like some of the things we've been talking about earlier, bringing infrastructure to projects is absolutely an incentive. If you don't have to spend $20-30 million, your owner doesn't, and you can put that burden on somebody else, that is an inducement. And then the recurring operating costs. So we saw this happen before, back after the last recession. in 08, 09, we saw a lot of pressure on industrial projects and just projects getting done that needed incentives to get over hurdle rates. It looks like we're back there in certain industries that, so it's a tough time. Communities are being demanded to pony up incentives, although some of their revenues may be down because of inflation and the pandemic. So it really is putting a lot of pressure. But if there's one thing that's new right now, that we're seeing more and more of a trend, is the need for incentives to be part of new CapEx industrial projects to get deals done. And then if office was hot right now, it would apply to them too. So if we saw a huge amount of workforce coming back into office buildings and more development happening, it would be there as well.
Great answer there, Anthony. Thank you. I think from what we've heard here today, I mean, we have a huge puzzle to put together for site selection, and to put that puzzle together, there's a lot of pieces and a lot of people that can, get those pieces for you. A lot of people that can do the digging to find those skeletons out there. I think the overall, it takes a long time to put that puzzle together. You may get the border done, you may get a corner done, but it's really not going to be complete until you put all those pieces in there together. I'm going to switch over here to some of the questions we have from the audience, and some of them I'm going to have, we may just reach out to you directly on, but I'm going to kind of skim through some of these here. And the first one I'm going to start with is for Brian. This comes from Juan. You mentioned reducing risk for the client and guaranteeing predictability, but how do you manage the liability risk associated with the selection process? How do we manage unforeseen items that only come up during the construction process?
Yeah, I didn't use the word guarantee, just to be clear. But I think when going through that process, it's important to look at all the analysis, the reports, the soil reports, and try and mitigate as many risks as possible. There's certainly the possibility for unforeseen things that are going to arise, but investing in that due diligence process and trying to address as many risks as possible is going to be key. I don't think you can ever get to a scenario where you completely eliminate risk, nor can you guarantee a site, but the more you can do to invest in that process, and some of it too involves looking at different contingencies and contingency plans early in that process.
Yeah. Got another question here. Maybe this one's for Anthony. Is there a client today who operates without price pressure?
Well, probably not, but there are certain companies that seems insulated. They are speed to market and speed to their customer is more important than cost. And I know that's hard to imagine, but there are manufacturers who are less cost sensitive. They already have efficiencies in their network, and with an expansion of a new project comes closing of other facilities, so that it pencils out very quickly. So they're less concerned about cost of construction materials, cost of products, because first of all, some of these clients take a long time to build. We're not talking about a 1-year build here. It's multi-years. And by the time they bring their product to market, the energy prices could be very different. So there are some out there that do, even though, it's probably a norm right now. So that's why we think incentives has become such a big deal. That's why, our site selection team exists, really, is to help bring as much value to that and lower those costs as much as we can.
And to piggyback on that, Anthony, are you seeing that more from end users versus developers, more cash heavy companies versus ones that require lending? Do you see a difference there?
As far as on the incentive side?
On the price pressure?
No, I think it's across the board. I probably wouldn't, from an ownership perspective, you probably could categorize that owner operators are less cost sensitive because they're financing with their own money, and that money may be cheaper than a developer's money or a pool of P firm money, or equity from another source. So that's a general statement, but that doesn't necessarily ring true for everyone.
Hey, Tom, I'd like to add to that, to Anthony's comment, and also add a response to Juan's question. I think too, when you talk about the puzzle and bringing all the pieces together as a team, ways to help mitigate some of the costs is having that contractor involved early in the process with the design firm, even when they might be very early in the design process. And some strategies to help mitigate some of that risk, or some of the cost risk at least, can be looking at long lead items, looking at critical items where you may have some early release packages, or pre-purchasing steel or certain materials, at today's cost, and storing them. So there are certainly some strategies that can come into play to help address some of the cost issues and reduce some of those risks.
Great. Okay. There's a lot of talk about reshoring, but does nearshoring in Mexico or other Latin American countries make more financial sense?
I would tell you, if it depends on which part of your equation matters the most. Obviously, labor rates in south of the border are still, 25% of what you're paying here. I mean, so if you're, heavily process oriented, and it has to be touched by human hands, there's a huge opportunity still for FDI in manufacturing and distribution in Mexico. There's no question about that. But it's not that easy, right? If you have to manufacture something and get it to a customer in the US, is it the right scenario, right business decision to put in Mexico? I mean, it depends, like from a utility infrastructure perspective, from a transportation perspective, from a security perspective, and there's lots of answers for those questions.
And you talked a lot about utilities. I mean, with some of these nearshoring locations, I mean, utilities, what are you finding there compared to what you'd find in the United States?
As far as cost, it's all over the map. I mean, so what's so unique about the US is its utility infrastructure and how deep a bench we have, from a water utility, from a wastewater utility, natural gas, and electricity. It's just very different in Mexico compared to working here. So
Sure.
I mean, it's not even apples and oranges, it's apples and pick another vegetable.
Shoes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to throw this one to Chris here. What are the standard due diligence timelines you're seeing due to lack of municipal staff?
Wow. That's so driven by where you are and what jurisdiction you're working through. I would say that we are seeing across the country many jurisdictions just not meeting their standard published return times, response times to submittals, and all that does is just it compresses the schedule, and it makes the resubmittal and the steps you take for approval to be so much more focused and detailed and proactive. So hard question to answer, but I would say across the board we're seeing that it's delayed.
Let's see here. Can manufacturing onshoring sustain its growth trajectory without government aid? Who wants to tackle that?
Oh man, that's an open-ended question. I mean, there's no question that the US is pushing certain industries. I mean, electrification, it's front and center, at least in the current administration, and how the US is trying to subsidize that, or in the semiconductor industry. But there are tons of industries that are not subsidized at all. I mean, we've got a German client here in the US last year, and they're in the copper business, and there were incentives, but it wasn't subsidized. And all of the other projects that we alluded to earlier today, none of those are getting government subsidies to sustain them on a reshoring or onshoring. Those clients across the ocean see the US is the market they need to be in, so they're coming here and making the financials work based on being in the largest economy in the world.
Mhm.
I mean, that's why they want to be here, and they do not want to be left out of the, being able to get to those consumers.
Thanks. Yeah, if anybody else want to add on to that or go to the next question?
I think when we look at the manufacturing, this certainly is, as Anthony alluded to, still the most attractive market in the world in terms of consumption. There's a lot of positive economics that are driving that. Certainly the government subsidizing certain industries has accelerated investment in certain industries, and it's attracted some of that FDI. And two, we're seeing there's a lot of geopolitical factors that are coming to play. And I think when we look at where the trajectory of industries over the next 10 to 15 years, I think the US is very well positioned to be a dominant player in the manufacturing space for decades to come.
Yeah, I think to add on to this here with this next question here, one of the largest wholesalers in the world based domestically has said that they're investing in additional warehouse, giving no confidence the US can surpass our trade partners in cost-effective manufacturing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think this goes back to, it's a similar question to, does it make more sense to onshore or reshore to the US or Mexico? I mean, there is a tough economic equation to solve in less developed countries like, India and parts of Asia. But those, if you look at the global statistics, the middle class is emerging in those parts of the world where most of the manufacturing went offshore back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And as those economies are being more well established, what's happening is the middle class is emerging. So wage rate pressure is happening in other parts of the world. So there's no question it's more expensive to operate here. It's not an expense issue to be in the US. It's a proximity to the large economy and the consumers we have in the US and the wealth they have and the propensity to consume. It seems like that's the bigger driver.
Well, and another driver, talking about the rising costs and developing middle classes in other countries, another factor that I'm not going to say it's leveling the playing field, but it's starting to level the playing field are a lot of the ESG requirements, where a lot of these international companies have requirements where you have to look through your complete supply chain and really do those analysis to look at costs, look at eliminating what might be inherent advantages that certain countries have related to their environmental, their carbon emissions, looking at the types of labor that they're using and what they're paying people. So there's a whole host of factors that I think are coming together very, very quickly from the ESG side, that as ultimately the people that are investing in projects and also the companies that are financing and evaluating projects, they're increasingly looking at those ESG goals. And that's going to be something that I think is going to continue to help level that playing field for the US. And ultimately, the question was pretty specific, and I'm not sure who the wholesaler was that the person was referring to, but ultimately when you're making investment decisions, there's not always the right answer. It comes down to a series of choices, and you have to really look at your business model, and what's right for your business today and into the near future. And all those factors need to come into the equation to make that right decision and evaluate those options for your business.
Well, and the thing that has drawn a lot of manufacturing to the US over the past couple of decades has been our low cost energy. And if that stabilizes and comes back down, the US is primed as anywhere for automation. I mean, so less hand, focus, less human dependent, more automation, especially when it comes to natural gas and electricity. If we see those stabilize again, I think we'll see even more manufacturer driven projects continuing to evaluate the US, because if I don't have to pay a lot of people and my cost of energy is lower, then maybe the equations is is like trying to operate somewhere else. And I think, to be clear, we haven't heard of one project that is leaving China or Asia and closing that one, and if by magic, lifting it out of the ground and moving it to America. That's not the equation. It's low cost Asia plus the US or Mexico or Canada.
There's a combination of them, it sounds like.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw one to you here. At what point should a land investor engage the following parties, and what's the best way to balance the upfront costs and getting the most data necessary to properly assess and underwrite a deal? What are your thoughts there?
Well, what have we been saying all along? Speed to market. I would say as early as possible. As far as engaging, I think it was Brian who mentioned that it's important for engaging a GC with the design team as early as possible. I would echo that from kind of the geotechnical environmental consulting side. I mean, I think it was Anthony that mentioned that the cost is a big driver in the bottom line, and so evaluating some of those considerations as early as possible is critical.
Yeah. So I assume the consultants that are out there to assist you in this have different levels of how they can help, right? As far as doing a very high level 30,000 foot view, or now getting down in the weeds and doing much more detail, similar to what Terracon does. You guys have your stage one where you can do something very inexpensive up front to give people some confidence up front. But you would still highly recommend that they would go out there and drill the site once they're closer to wanting to close on the deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that stage one product is not intended to replace, design level geotech or design level considerations, but as we've discussed, to give a highly confident snapshot of a site or a comparison of sites. I did see a question in the chat, so I'll go ahead and answer it. Someone had asked, I think how many borings are needed for a 100,000 square foot warehouse, which kind of tees off this question. And that's really a standard of care, an engineering standard of care answer based on protecting not just the developer, the owner, but the design team's risk. But again, coming back to cost being a major driver now, I would almost argue that you can't over explore a site. When you're looking at the ground improvement cost, I think someone mentioned that there are no good sites left, and so ground improvement is a major line item in our project's budget these days, and it's one of the ways to really explore how to find some of those cost reductions is actually expanding on that standard of care, and some people may say over explore the site.
Well, a lot of great questions here. I think we're at a point where we need to wrap up. We've reached our time. Appreciate SIOR for allowing us to host this. We do have our LinkedIn information up here. If you guys have further questions, please reach out. I saw some that were very specific to Colliers and some of these other programs that are being used in the prop tech. Be happy to answer those, but really appreciate everybody's time today. Hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks everyone from Ware Malcomb. If you have any final thoughts, please let us know. Otherwise, I will keep this screen up, and I hope everyone has a wonderful